My grandfather, William John Gardner, had an Aunt Agnes who married Henry Hughes. They lived in Mendon before they moved to Teton. Henry, as a toddler, he and his family immigrated to the United States aboard the ship Falcon in 1853. They traveled across the plains with the Appleton and Harmon Company and arrived in Salt Lake Valley in October of that same year. They settled in Big Cottonwood Canyon, and then they traveled to Cache Valley in 1862 and settled in Mendon. I would like to do the story of Henry's father. His name was also Henry Hughes. Although not a direct relative, I think it's a story that is very interesting and a story that should be told. So, Henry Hughes writes the following. I, Henry Hughes, the son of Robert Hughes and Martha Reed, was born in Flintshire near Mold, North Wales, on December 25th, 1825. I lived at Mold until I was 15 years old, and I worked the coal mines when I was 9 years old and did not see daylight only on Saturday and Sunday in the winter season. I feel thankful to the Lord for my mountain home where I can bring my family without sending them to the coal pits. I must escape for my life. The one which I refer to here took place in 1837 on the 9th day of May at the Argueil Collier, about 1 mile distance from Mold. On the 9th day of May in that year, 32 souls, men and boys, including myself, descended the shaft, which was 70 yards deep, to work. There was an old deserted pit close to the one where we worked, which was 65 years old, before it suddenly filled with water. Some of the men had been warned not to work too near to the old pit for fear the water would break through and flood the one where we were working. At about 8 o'clock in the morning of the said date, the men and the boys were all called out, as the water had begun to break through from the old pit and was coming in on us. When, however, we got to the shaft to be hoisted up, a man named John Owen, there was no danger, so we returned and resumed work. In 2 hours afterwards, the water rushed in such quantity and force that 7 our number were drowned, and the rest of us with the exception of 2, rushed to a position in the highest part of which is called the air course. 20 of us huddled together without any way of escape, with no air to breathe and nothing to eat. Death seemed to stare us in the face. In a short time our lights went out for want of air, and to add to the horrors of the situation, we were left in total darkness. Never shall I forget the fearful picture of human despair which was presented by a young man named William Hallett. When he realized his awful situation, he uttered shrieks of agony. He called over the names of his young wife and his little children, and plunged into his heart and tore it from his head in handfuls. Some sat silent and gloomy, speaking not a word, apparently awaiting the visits of a grim monster death. Others wept, and I noticed 2 men with large and corpulent men named, respectively, Thomas Jones and William Williams. They went off a few feet aside and from the others, and they prayed. These 2 last died in a few hours. Afterwards, to add to the horror of our position, the mud was 6 inches deep where we were. Among our number was a young man named John Jones. He had always manifested great interest and affection for me. This affection remained with him until death, as will be seen by the following incident. In order to keep me out of the mud, he took me in his arms and laid me across his lap. In this position I went to sleep. When I woke up, my dear friend was dead. The breathing of the gas which had gathered in the place which we were in prison caused a kind of stupor to come over us, and it was well that it was so, else we might have been tempted to drink some of the sulphuric water which the pit was flooded, which we would have proved certain our death. As it was, our minds were so deranged that although suffering with burning thirst, we did not know enough to go and drink it. We remained in this terrible condition for 3 days and 2 nights, during which time 12 of our number died. A portion of the time I laid on 4 dead bodies. The people outside meanwhile had not been doing all in their power to rescue us by emptying the pit of water as fast as possible. On the third day of relief arrived. The first person who came to us was my brother John Hughes, who was then a young man. The first man he reached was John Cadrick, and the first words he said to him were, "Is Henry alive?" Cadrick answered, "He was a short time since." My brother continued to crawl over bodies of my fellow workmen, shaking them as he went to see whether they were alive, until he got to myself. He shook me and called me by name, and I answered by making a mournful, wailing noise. He took me in his arms, and the water was only about a foot from the roof, and he got on his back and paddled himself along, holding me above the water till we got to the shaft. Those of us who were alive were taken up in a short distance at a time. If we had been taken up too suddenly into fresh after we were taken up, we were carefully nursed and sparingly until our strength returned and was among the first to recover. The incident caused great excitement all over the part of the country. There's a great fair being held in Mold on the 12th of May when we were being taken out of the pit, and all the people left the fair, so that it was completely deserted and came to us. And when we reached the top of the shaft, the assembly crowds rent the air with deafening cheers, and many of the people wept for joy. 2 men who were in another part of the pits were found dead 11 days after we were taken out. During the time I was imprisoned in the pit, I had no fear of that. An idea of it never entered my mind. I often feel thankful to God that my life was spared, that I have lived to hear and obey the gospel of Jesus Christ. I feel thankful for my mountains and homes, and I can bring my own family up in the gospel of Christ.